What is up, guys? Just got married Cactus here. Back from my honeymoon, I can finally start making videos for you guys again, and while I was gone, you probably noticed some brand new Anthem gameplay going up on the channel, which, not gonna lie, was scheduled for the worst possible times. The most recent one I made on the last day of my honeymoon with a pina colada in hand. Bet you didn't notice. Maybe you did. Anyways, by far the most common question I got asked with those videos, and frankly anytime I do Anthem content, is Anthem any good? Is this game good? Is it enjoyable? Is it fun to play? Is it something I should look into? And today I finally have the opportunity to hopefully answer that question to the best of my experience. Now I say best of my experience because my answer is going to be based on what I have played, seen, and know about Anthem so far, and thankfully for you guys, that is quite a lot. I've been involved with Anthem for a while. I'm probably approaching like 30 plus hours played within the game. This is not going to be a perspective of someone who saw a couple trailers and is throwing up a video. It's someone very well versed within the game. Now, let's get started here with, frankly, one of the main negatives I see about Anthem. Whenever I tweet or make a video about Anthem, this always comes up, and that is EA trash game. EA not gonna bother, EA is gonna ruin Anthem, and let's be honest, I get that. Like, I very much get that sentiment. EA has done some pretty scummy things in the past, and people are still burned from past EA games. Like, if you're coming from Star Wars Battlefront 2, I totally understand why you see that's published by EA and you're like, I don't trust this game. That makes sense to me. However, saying it's an EA game so I'm not gonna bother, in my opinion, is just as silly as saying, oh, Bethesda, I always buy their games. That didn't work out too well with Fallout 76. I think, and I don't know why more people don't just take this approach, the best thing to do is just to judge each game on an individual basis. Do your research, watch gameplay, play the game if there's a beta or a demo, and see if you enjoy it. If you do, pick up the game. If you don't, it's not for you. It's not a big deal. But frankly, the good news coming out of Star Wars Battlefront 2 is that EA got burned there. It got burned hard, and it doesn't want that to happen again. So if you look at the more recent games like Battlefield 5, free DLC. Its competitor with Activision and Black Ops 4 still charging for a season's pass. One of the positives for Anthem is that it has a pretty darn player-friendly monetization model. All of the story and extra map content, all those DLCs are free forever. The devs have said that they do not want to split up the player base. It is going to be charging for skins in a direct purchase store like Fortnite, but even then you can earn the skins in-game, and there's no loot boxes whatsoever. Like, on the spectrum, that's pretty darn good. Now, of course, I'm not all-knowing. If they go back on their word or something we didn't expect happens, of course that may be negative, but from what we know so far, it's looking pretty darn good. But I am not saying to rush out and pre-order the game right now, simply to judge for yourself. And another positive of Anthem is that you're going to be able to do so and at least partially answer this question of, is Anthem good? Because there is a free demo happening on February 1st to the 3rd. You can pick from multiple different Javelins, you can level up a little bit, you can play different missions as well as a stronghold, which actually is kind of a big deal. Like, that's one of the more endgame activities. So you are going to be able to play and experience a relatively decent portion of the game and try it out for yourself. Now, speaking of those different Javelins and selecting those different Javelins, that's another big positive for Anthem. The 4 different classes called Javelins within Anthem, the Ranger, Colossus, Storm, and Interceptor, are all drastically different from one another, and they all play very different as well. When you're playing the Interceptor, it has access to a triple dodge. You can jump, dodge, dodge, dodge. You can even switch directions. Dodge forward, dodge to the right, dodge forward again if you want to. So you are so mobile without ever having to fly. We'll talk about flight later, but you are so able to get around the map without flying. So you can fly, and then when your thrusters kind of heat up, you can start dodging everywhere. It is a totally different experience than when you're playing the Colossus, the big tanky guy. You're much slower, but you have a lot of health. You are much more powerful. You're able to use weapons that the other classes can't get, like grenade launchers. And so, again, a very different experience. With the Storm, you actually get a benefit to your shield when you're hovering. So you are constantly in the air hovering, and when you're hovering, you can almost hover indefinitely. So you are raining down abilities onto people. With the Ranger, he's a mix of all those classes a little bit. He's more just on the ground, getting in people's faces. He's a great all-around class. They play so differently, and that's something that is a welcome thing coming from Destiny. If you switch from Hunter to Titan, how different is your experience really? You have a different jump, definitely. There's some different mobility. Your grenades look and do slightly different things, but they basically still just blow up. Your supers are slightly different, but I think the diversity between the classes of Anthem is much greater than something like Destiny, and it makes the experience very fresh. Now, let's talk a little bit about flight and mobility. This is a big thing within Anthem, and this is something that really distinguishes it from other games. What other games can you literally fly somewhere, right? In Destiny, that's a loading screen. But in Anthem, if you want to get to that rock up on that mountain, you can. You fly on top of it, right? Now, of course, there is limitations to the world. It does have a skybox type of thing where you can't go above a certain distance because the currents are so strong, it'll force you downwards. So there's not unlimited mobility. But when you do play the game, the amount of scenarios that come up because of flight are kind of insane. Like, if you're fighting a bunch of enemies directly in front of you, you're behind a rock, normally you would just peek out of the rock, shoot a few guys, go back, peek out of the rock. This one you can say, well, I don't like things behind this rock, I'm just gonna yeet, and you can just fly complete to the side, flank all the way behind the enemies, get into a totally different position. Now, you are a little bit vulnerable, of course, when you're doing that. You can still be hit and shot at when you are flying in Anthem, but the mobility is insane. And not just with flying. The fact that you can fly up, hover, do an ability, keep going, again, that distinguishes Anthem from other games. But like we said with the Interceptor, there's dodges, there's double jumps, there's mobility beyond flying. And just like you can fly out of the rock, you can dodge to a completely different rock. Even the Colossus, who doesn't have a dodge, can put up a shield and then like tank a bunch of fire as he moves to a different location. But it's not just that you can do all of that stuff, but that it's pretty easy to do all of that stuff. Going from standing, double jumping into a flight, pausing in mid-air for an ability usage, and going back into flight again sounds complicated, but it's not that hard to do. And this is actually a pretty important thing. Again, I've been involved with Anthem for a while. Flight has improved, let's just say, and it's really good at its state right now. When you pick up the game, when you get your hands on it for the demo or the full game, it's going to be a really good experience in terms of actually being able to utilize all these different features of its mobility. But moving on from there, let's talk about another thing, which is abilities and weapons. And this is kind of a positive and a negative, actually, because in Anthem, your abilities charge very fast, they're devastating, and frankly, they matter more than your weapons. Now, that's not to say that your weapons are useless, far from it, but if you're coming from a traditional first-person shooter, like even Destiny, Call of Duty, whatever, you are not going to have that same emphasis on gunplay. In fact, in Anthem, the gunplay isn't as good as something like Destiny. Straight up, it just isn't. It can be a little bit difficult to get headshots at times. It has, just like mobility, vastly improved, but it's not as good of an experience. But even though the shooting mechanics aren't incredible, and by the way, they're not bad, they're just not top tier, you won't notice it as much because you're utilizing your abilities so much more, and because abilities are so important. So it doesn't completely detract from the experience by any means, but it is definitely a negative. Alright, now moving on from there, let's talk about loot and builds and all of that stuff. Like we were saying previously, abilities are a little bit more important than guns, but both abilities and guns are part of the loot pool. This is something a lot different than many other games. when you compare Destiny. Your grenade, you just select what grenade you want. I'm a Titan, I want a pulse grenade, boom, I have a pulse grenade, and there might be an exotic armor piece that affects it slightly, but other than that, my grenade is my grenade is my grenade from when I unlock it to endgame, right? But in Anthem, that's absolutely not the case. If you're playing the Ranger, you also have a grenade as an ability, but you can loot many different kinds of grenades. You can have a normal high explosive grenade, then you can have an ice grenade that freezes everyone, right? You have all those different options, and because it's part of the loot pool, you can get better versions or different versions of grenades. Okay, I found a better high explosive grenade. I found a high explosive grenade that does more damage but has less of a radius. I found one with a bigger radius but does a little bit less damage. All of that stuff. Because abilities are part of the loot pool, you have a lot of different variety within them, and it really does matter in a loot-based game. Anthem is going to swing more the way of something like Diablo 3 or The Division, where you can get the perfect, not necessarily perfect, but the highest rarity version of everything. You know, it's not like Destiny where it's one exotic weapon, one exotic armor piece, that's it. In Anthem, you can have Mastercrafts or Ancient or whatever the top rarity of everything. And again, you can have Ancient Mastercraft grenades and Mastercraft weapons and all that stuff. You have a lot to go for in the end game in terms of just strict loot. It harkens back to a more Borderlands experience. But a negative is that you are just getting one piece of loot and you can't necessarily customize that piece of loot aside from cosmetically. And I mention that because you do have a game like The Division, especially with The Division 2 releasing just a few weeks after Anthem, that will let you do that. In The Division, you get a weapon, and it may be a legendary or an epic or whatever the top rarity of weapon is, and then you can also customize that by putting on different attachments. So do you want this to just do a ton of damage? Do you want to load this weapon up for crit chance, or do you want to increase its magazine size, make it more of a spray and pray option, try to increase its fire rate? You have those different customization options, and those aren't available within Anthem. But I do want to mention that Anthem has more in the loot pool than just weapons and abilities. You can get stuff for your armor that will impact your build by giving you different bonuses, all of that stuff, the traditional stuff that we've seen in terms of speccing a certain build in a certain way. Now, we've talked about loot, but Anthem does some interesting stuff with acquiring and equipping loot. And this is both on the positive and the negative side of the spectrum. So when you're playing Anthem and you kill a boss or just kill an enemy and a loot piece drops, you pick that up and it just tells you uncommon item or epic item, and that's it. You don't actually get to know what that item is. You can't open your inventory and see what it is, nothing, until you go all the way back to Fort Tarsis. Now, the positives of that are that you won't have teammates that disappear because they get a new loot piece. We've all had that, especially, you know, for me in Destiny, you have someone get a legendary and they open their inventory and they're gone for the entire fight, if not the entire strike or whatever activity you're doing. That's super frustrating. Having this method of getting loot will keep everyone focused on the mission at hand, and then after you beat that mission, you can go and do your own stuff and equip that loot and see what you got. The negative is that if you are looking for a sniper for your build and you finally get one, you're still going to have to go that whole mission without the sniper you want, rather than being able to equip on the fly. And also, when you are equipping this stuff in Anthem, the only way to put stuff on your Javelin is to go to the Forge and then equip stuff. You go to the Forge, and that's where you change your build and change your weapons, and then you go out into the world, right? So it means that you can't change your builds on the fly. If you get to a boss and you're like, oh man, this build is not working, I need to equip a sniper, I need to equip a new ability, tough luck. You can't. You have to go all the way back to Fort Tarsis, and that is definitely going to cause some frustration. But on the positive end of the spectrum, it means that you do have to dedicate for a certain build, and choosing your build is going to be a lot more important than just throwing on a bunch of random high-level stuff, because if you're running 2 sniper rifles or 2 long-range options, you could get into a lot of trouble. You're gonna have to put, again, thought into your builds before you go out into the world, and again, I view that as a positive. But we also have the negative. That's really going to be personal preference, frankly, on whether you enjoy those features. Now, moving on from there, let's talk about story and characters, because this is a BioWare game. These are the people who made the Mass Effect series, which, you know, especially Mass Effect 1 and 2 kind of pioneered the way for choosing your path and having different alternatives and actually having consequences for your actions in game. Mass Effect is definitely one of my favorite series of all time. So, Anthem is going to have more of an emphasis on story than your traditional looter shooter. Some of the cutscenes I've seen have frankly blown me away. The voice acting is superb. The facial animations are superb, especially that's good coming from Mass Effect Andromeda, obviously, but they are amazing in this game. Now, of course, I can't comment on the entire storyline and its quality, but from what I've experienced, it has been pretty intriguing and it has kept me interested. That being said, there's still some confusing parts and things I don't know. Will those be cleared up later in the game? Well, we just don't know yet. Also, the in-game banter ranges from really interesting and sometimes even funny, thought-provoking, whatever, to kind of cringy at times as well. So again, varies in quality from mission to mission, and there's a lot of the game that I haven't experienced yet, so I can't comment too much on that. The main thing is that, you know, compared to a game like Destiny, this is going to have, I think, better storytelling. You will have those one-on-one conversations with characters. You can probe characters and get more information. If you go talk to Zavala, he gives you a throwaway line and then he opens his inventory to sell you stuff, right? You can't probe further. Zavala, where did you come from? What was it like when you awoke, you know, with your ghost? How did you become the leader of the Vanguard? I know, I'm sure it's in a Grimoire card somewhere, but I would love to talk to Zavala and find that out. In Anthem, you actually can talk to characters, engage with them. You have dialogue options that are aside from the main storyline where you're just learning more about the world, and I really appreciate that. But that's all positive. The negative is that there isn't as much, and there really doesn't seem to be as much diversity of conversation as there was in a Mass Effect game. From what BioWare has revealed, you basically have 2 different choices, and you aren't able to romance characters, and, you know, I don't think you can necessarily cause the death or kill one of the main characters and stuff like that. You can't go insane with choices and consequences, so don't expect it to be necessarily to the degree of a Mass Effect game, but it's still much better than a game like Destiny or even a game like Division in terms of storytelling. So, you know, again, it's a positive or negative based on your personal opinion. But the last thing I wanted to talk about is Endgame. This is a huge issue. It was the downfall of Destiny 2 when it came out. It was the downfall of the Division. So many games do not have a substantial end game and they get in trouble. Some introduce them as time goes on. Destiny 2 is now at a pretty decent state for endgame. The Division improved the heck out of its endgame as well. But of course, it'd be nice to not have a rocky road and have the developers have to introduce the endgame prior to the game releasing. It'd be nice to just have it when the game comes out. Will Anthem be able to do that? Well, from what we know so far, there is going to be a big raid style activity that is added to Anthem soon-ish after release. Now, whether that's a few weeks, months, we don't exactly know, but that is planned. As far as we know so far, in terms of the end game, when Anthem releases, you have the, I believe, 4 different strongholds to play, and then you also have legendary contracts and some harder than normal missions, and that's kind of it. Now, in terms of special events, we don't know about that. In terms of, stuff, of course, you can go into free play and do stuff there, But that's kind of it for the activities. Now, the good news is that there will be quite a few different difficulties to play and master. It won't be like Destiny where there's basically no different difficulties. A strike is a strike, and sometimes you have prestige stuff, but whatever. In Anthem, at max level, you do unlock 3 additional difficulties: 2 easy, normal, hard. You have Grandmaster 1, Grandmaster 2, and Grandmaster 3, each promising more loot drops than the last. So of course, trying to beat a stronghold is one thing, trying to beat it on Grandmaster 3 is another thing. But that's kind of the same formula the Division used with its missions. It was just playing it on harder difficulties. And frankly, to be honest here, I don't have the answer for you guys. Like, it could be enough. Strongholds could keep players interested until that raid activity drops. There could be limited time events that happen as well to keep us interested, and everything is good and Anthem goes super smoothly in the end game. Or people could blast through those strongholds and then kind of be waiting for the next thing to do really early, and that could be a big negative to Anthem. I'm not 100% sure how the end game will turn out. But aside from that, frankly, the answer to, is Anthem good, is, in my opinion, a resounding yes. The game is fun to play, it's different to play, it feels very unique. The mobility and the different javelins and their abilities and all that stuff feel great. The looting aspect, I love loot-based games, and I'm really looking forward to going into Anthem trying to find the highest rarity mortar pods and weapons and all of that stuff. I am so excited for that stuff, and frankly, the highest rarity loot has some pretty insane added on abilities as well. Like, it really seems like a solid game. The only main concern I have is that end game. And it's not necessarily a concern as, oh my gosh, there isn't none. It's a concern as, could players run through this too fast and have nothing to do before that raid activity drops? And if that's the case, that could be a big negative. So those are my thoughts on pretty much every single aspect on Anthem. Guys, if you learned something new, if you found this informative, please remember to help this video out by simply rating and especially sharing this video. If you guys want to see more Anthem content similar to this, don't be afraid to slap that subscribe button. And if you guys want to get in touch with me and keep up to date with the latest channel activity, the best way is to follow me on Twitter at RickCacus. That's linked in the description down below, as is my Twitch channel, which you can also follow. Again, I hope you enjoyed the video, and as always, have a good day.